Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast, brought to you by LawVu, LawVu's community for in-house legal professionals. LawVu's mission is to accelerate the evolution of the in-house legal profession, and with this podcast, we showcase modern legal leaders from across the globe. We explore their unique journeys and how they're driving the transformation of our new profession. Join David Lancelot, LawVu's Chief Legal Officer and Executive Vice President of Advocacy, as he explores the cutting edge of in-house legal leadership. This is the Legal Leaders Podcast.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast. I'm David Lancelot, your host, the CLO and EVP Advocacy at LawVu. I have the great pleasure to have with me here today Michelle Clatfelter, who's the CLO of Springfield Clinic. Hi, Michelle. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, David.
And this is kind of a silly question, but where are you joining us from today, Michelle?
I am in my office located in downtown Springfield, Illinois, right smack in the center of the Midwest.
Nice. Yes. So it's a bit silly because obviously Springfield Clinic, it does what it says on the box. You're in Springfield, which is the capital of Illinois. For anyone who doesn't know that, who didn't go to high school in the United States and have to learn all the capitals like I did, capitals of the 50 states. And Springfield is the second largest metro in Illinois after Chicago. So a pretty significant center of population, a couple 100,000 people in the larger metro. And the Springfield Clinic services that sort of metro and wider area, I think it's fair to say. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so can you tell us a little bit for anybody who doesn't know, and I maybe it's worth saying. So I really wanted to showcase modern legal leadership in the healthcare industry. You know, it's one of the biggest industries, certainly in the United States, if not globally. And after having seen you speak at a Consero conference for healthcare GCs, I was just like, this is the one, right? This is the one. She's saying the things that I think a lot of people, especially in healthcare, but throughout the in-house profession, would like to hear. So thank you for joining us today. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Springfield Clinic and what you guys do.
Well, sure. And thank you again, David, and thank you for the kind words. Springfield Clinic we're an independent physician group. Technically a limited partnership, but independent nonetheless, of approximately 350 physician owners, 700 plus providers located throughout central and southern Illinois. The independent part I tend to underscore because it is integral to who we are and how we've become what we've become. We started as a group of 5 physicians pre-World War II. 4 of those physicians went off to war. 1 stayed back to essentially continue services. The other 4 came back, and that's how Springfield Clinic was born. Since then, we've grown organically over many years. Small groups of independent physicians that want to maintain independence in this world of massive healthcare consolidation have done so by finding us. And We've done it for many years now. We intend to do it into perpetuity. And as a result, all decision making, while we've got an executive team, they have a chief legal officer, chief HR officer, it very much involves the clinician's perspective. Something that I think is important no matter the setting, but can easily get lost under different models of ownership.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think for people, particularly outside the United States, who don't have as much involvement, let's say, in how we run the healthcare business here, it's probably worth noting that, as you were saying, a lot of healthcare now is getting wound up by private equity and big sort of corporate interests. That's what you're seeing, right?
Very much the trend. Very much the trend.
Right.
And even the groups that have come to join us, it's a fight for sustainability in the small practice world. Here, we've been able to do it where between scale, but also having a diverse group of multi-specialties represented, we've been able to do it in a way that is sustainable, hopefully into perpetuity.
Right on. And so, like, if I was driving through Central Illinois, would I see places that said Springfield Clinic on them?
You would see quite a few. I believe we're upwards of 90 locations.
Okay.
We're headquartered here in Springfield, but we have pretty significant presence in other cities throughout Central Illinois as well.
Gotcha. And these are providers doing anything from like general practice for families to more specialists?
Yeah, great question. So we run the gambit, really kind of cradle to grave. We have primary care, we have specialists and subspecialists, we have medical specialties, surgical specialties, hospital-based specialties. So we really do run the gambit. We do have some affiliate companies that focus in things outside of the professional service, if you will, that help augment the delivery of the professional service. We have 2 ambulatory surgery centers. We do collaborate with health systems in our markets, actually here in Springfield, as well as Peoria and our way, which is another one of our hubs. Um, Here in Springfield, we have 2 hospitals that are level 1 trauma center. One of them is also a level 2 pediatric trauma center. And both are really the tertiary hospitals for the surrounding area. Similar in Peoria as well. Technically 1 level 1 trauma center, but 3 hospitals. And between those hospitals, they really serve as the place where all the hard stuff gets transferred, right? So while we do outreach and we do a lot with critical access and other smaller hospitals outside our service area, having these kind of unique healthcare ecosystems where you have these higher levels of care, academic medicine, and an independent group all kind of coming together, it actually creates a really cool symbiotic kind of healthcare ecosystem, if you will.
Sure. Robust and deep for the sort of residents of Central Illinois. So that's super interesting. When you say like the hard stuff, the more, the harder and harder it gets up the sort of, I don't know what, if you want to call it the value chain, but the specialist, chain. It really reminds me of legal practice. And I've worked with one of the really cool things about the job I have now is I get to meet people from all across different sectors of in-house practice, right? Where I was very focused previously on sort of international tech and e-commerce and that sort of thing. But now I get to meet people in higher ed who are dealing with issues that I can't even imagine having to deal with, and people in healthcare with similarly complex, practice areas, right? Where you're kind of running a town or a enormous health system, a bunch of doctors doing all kinds of things. So I think it's really, really fascinating. And I'm wondering how, and for the benefit of our audience and myself, how somebody goes from, early days in legal practice to where you are now, right? Because there is no model for in-house, right? At all, let's say. There's no model. I think we all understand that. It's a relatively new profession. And those of us who are in senior positions have had to sort of build their own path. So I'm really interested, Michelle, how somebody goes from, say, pre-law school to CLO of a really significant practice group, and does it in a way that gets you to be a modern, effective CLO. Because I know, like higher ed, like a lot of other, businesses, the traditional model is probably more prevalent in healthcare than the modern model of in-house leadership. So maybe we start from the start. What got you into legal practice in the first place?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I grew up in a family of clinicians. So my dad was a surgeon, head and neck surgeon. My mom was a CRNA. He had a small independent practice, the kind that's hard to sustain now.
Yep.
So I went in very much exposed to healthcare as an industry, knowing my particular skill set didn't align with being a clinician myself. So it was a combination of wanting to be in the healthcare space, but trying to really be kind of honest with what my talents are. And I went off to college. I remember, they set me up with like an advisor out of the gate. And I was like, well, I think I want to go to med school because that's what I've been exposed to, or law school. And
Yeah.
ultimately, the classes I wanted to take were the social sciences. I loved debate policy type classes. So I really just kind of followed my instincts on what I enjoyed doing, but I kept that focus and kind of that passion and interest around healthcare. That actually led me to a law school that happens to be, they have a gem of a program in health law. So I was really fortunate that the stars aligned in that regard from an educational sense. But you're so right, David. Once you go to law school and you're trying to decide, how do I turn this into my career path? There's no template. There's no guidebook. I don't know. Maybe if we ask AI now what that roadmap looks like, maybe they would have one. But there certainly wasn't one
Gotta try. I
when I was
literally have not tried
graduating
that.
law
That's a
school
good
almost 20
idea.
years
That's a
ago.
good idea.
So I think it's a great question. And it's funny. I remember at the time I graduated law school, my now husband, then boyfriend, had a career based here in Springfield. And I remember thinking, okay, what can I do where I'm able to practice health law and kind of stay true to what I want to do, but we can make this work, geographically and depending on what's available in Springfield, Illinois. And I was very fortunate that there was a law firm that had a practice group that focused on healthcare. And I was able to do that for a few years as outside counsel. But at the time, there was no in-house legal counsel, at least not around here. And
Sure.
certainly not, really that prevalent in the industry. And that has all changed during my career. I've been fortunate to be a part of it, but it certainly wasn't because there was any clear roadmap on how to do that,
Yes.
let
Well,
alone
and
do it effectively.
yeah. No, well, so I think it's very well said, Michelle. Like early days, I mean, maybe this is obvious, maybe it's not to some people, but there were no in-house lawyers. There really weren't. There were a few maybe in the really gigantic concerns, the big railroads or whatever. But there weren't in-house lawyers in the majority of businesses in the United States. And that over the past 30 years has obviously changed pretty dramatically, but there's still tens of thousands of businesses that don't have in-house lawyers that need them. And I think we're seeing a bit of almost like a tidal wave now, a tipping point where companies are earlier and earlier in their life cycles realizing that, the legal stuff, they would say, is actually super valuable to their business models, especially in spaces that are heavily regulated like healthcare, crypto, anything to do with the government these days, et cetera, international work. So yeah, that's evolved dramatically, as well as how do you even do the job, right?
Right.
What is the job? I think is the way I would put it. What the heck is my job?
Absolutely. Adding in the layer of how do you do it effectively. And again, no clear template for that. And what I really learned is, yes, there's the element of businesses realizing there's value in having your legal arm at your side involved, looking at one client, connecting all the dots for that client versus, doing slivers of things for 50 or 100 different clients, right? It's a different job. But I think the other element of that, beyond having, the value of in-house counsel, the savings of in-house counsel, the benefit of the convenience of in-house counsel, I think beyond that, they appreciate having another executive brain at the table that maybe approaches the thought process a little different, still knows how to apply the business lens, the strategic lens, understands the business, and can exercise good judgment. I mean, a lot of what we do is professional problem solving and sometimes just using our own kind of common sense, if you will, to just exercise good business and other judgment. And I sometimes joke too. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Billions, but it's about, a big hedge fund guy, big brilliant billionaire. And he's got a therapist, a counselor, if you will, in the other counselor sense. that serves on his executive team and his right-hand person. And when all of his money makers' heads are about to pop off, she screws them back on straight. And I joke, sometimes I feel like I'm her just without the billions and the hedge funds and the New York high rise. So,
No, yeah,
I think the job is so multidimensional.
sure,
And it goes so far beyond risk mitigation and management and contract review and transactional due diligence. Those are all pieces of what we do, and frankly, pieces of things that we sometimes lean on our outside peers to help us with. But what we do every day internally is part of an executive team, part of a business, developing a strategy for how you drive an organization, which isn't always just a clear-cut business or legal question. It's cool. It's a different type of job than simply being a lawyer.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And as I said earlier, I really think of it as a new profession that doesn't have the obviously doesn't have the training from graduate school to say this is the way you do this job. I mean, I don't have an MBA. I wish I did. I didn't, qualify as an accountant or many other professions, but I imagine that in those places they say this is how you do this job well. Whereas in law school, particularly in the United States, but I was literally just talking to somebody in Copenhagen. And he said it's exactly the same here. We're teaching people how to be judges or academics, and certainly not teaching them how to work at a company, and certainly not teaching them how to be a legal operator,
Mhm.
right? Or technology
Right,
or any of that kind of stuff, right? Like we're
right.
way far away from that. So I think you did some time like in politics a little bit
I
before
did.
law
I
school.
dipped my toe just enough. I was actually between undergraduate studies and law school. I spent 2 years with the Illinois Senate, which was long enough for me to learn I'm not a lifer in
Sure.
that space, but it also was great experience out of the gate as someone who enjoys the policy side of things. And when you're talking about how you apply it on this side of the house, kind of, seeing how the sausage is made, learning enough to be dangerous. I'm glad I had those 2 years. So
Yes.
that was my experience kind of out of the gate as a brand new young 20 something
Yeah.
before
Well, and
law
I think
school.
it's one of those things where having a little bit of work experience in, whether it's government or a company or nonprofit or whatever, before you go to law school, I think really sets you up for same as if you were to do your MBA, right? Like having a little bit of actually knowing what a company is,
Right.
instead of just going straight from undergrad to grad school to the law firm. And then you really have no real world concept of what it means to be part of a business.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's super helpful. Everyone I talk to who's done that has sort of had an accelerator in their, on ramp to going in house. So let's say you're at the law firm now. What was it that got you to move from the firm to your first in-house role? How did that happen for
Yeah,
everybody listening?
great question. Because I loved the law firm I was at. I know, um, you're gonna depending on who you pulse check, you're gonna get mixed reviews on what it's like to live in that world. I loved my old law firm. I still use them sometimes, maintain relationships with a lot of those attorneys. But long story short, the health system down the street that had never staffed in-house decided it was time to staff in-house. I
Mm,
was really fortunate that it was the right point in my career. I was 5 years in as an associate. I wasn't a partner yet. I had a lot of runway and growth opportunity, but I wasn't so far into my tenure there that it made it hard to leave from that angle. So the firm was very supportive when the opportunity arose. So I was able to really step out of that world and move right into the world of being in-house at a large health system.
wow. And sorry, what was that one called? I don't
That
remember.
South Little Sisters Health System. And
Hospital.
so I
Hospital.
started there as a corporate counsel. So I was doing the work. I was writing the contracts and doing the redlining and, really I was the worker bee for a couple of years, and then received 2 different promotions during my time there, ultimately ending my tenure there as their VP of Legal Services for the state of Illinois. So 9 hospitals, all located in Illinois, and went to all their board meetings and worked with all their CEOs and worked on how we make a regionalized approach to healthcare delivery in this central southern Illinois market space. So great opportunity. Learned a lot while I was there. Loved representing hospitals. I mean, it's very different than what I do now, but certainly something I was passionate about. I connected with the purpose. Had a phenomenal 2 mentors, actually. Both of the people I reported to, the general counsel who's still there, still a friend of mine, and as well as our division president. So
interesting.
Set me up for success in moving to Springfield Clinic.
So there was somebody there, as you're saying, who brought you in and gave you the model for how to be an in-house lawyer, basically, to start with, right? Mm-hmm. And what do you think were the main differences at that point between the private practice world and the in-house world?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because she came from private practice as well. So she never sat me down and said, this is what we need to do our jobs well, right?
Sure.
But I learned by example because she did it. And I emulated her style, her approach. She was very big on kind of giving us the latitude we needed to own our space, own our decisions, own our recommendations, while keeping alignment, within our
Sure.
team as well. So having both come from private practice and now being, in-house, again, we weren't working off of a roadmap, but you do learn pretty quickly. I mean, this is a different environment, and being part of one executive team that is working for one client effectively, and how you connect those dots on things that may not even seem related, but maybe are, or maybe having an appreciation for what's going on over here impacts the lens you apply to something totally different over here. It is a very different lens than when you're looking at individual kind of prepackaged projects for different
Sure.
clients. And that's not to undercut what people do on the outside, as well. I mean, when I was external counsel, I cut my teeth on some hard projects that I'm glad that I learned from and was able to gather experience from doing. But it is, and that's just getting into the work side of it, right? From an org standpoint, law firms are very flat. You're a partner, you're an associate, maybe there's various levels of partnership. You've got, support and administrative staff, maybe some paralegals, but you don't have these heavily matrixed,
Sure.
executive teams and board structures and governance structures. And so it just looks and feels different.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a lot to learn. And I when I was hiring at eBay, I always had on the list of qualifications, has worked in a matrixed organization. Because it's just such a heavy lift to get somebody out of this is a relatively simple structure to, we've got a center of excellence in Salt Lake that does this. And then we've got 17 business units and each of them has a matrix. And you know what I mean? It would take too long, basically. It would take too long to get somebody up to speed on that sort of stuff, unless they were really, coming in at a very junior level. And when you were saying that, Michelle, you really made me think about, like, I would never say, and I hope nobody says this anymore, that the purpose of the legal function is purely to spot and mitigate risk, right? That is not our job. in-house, and it hasn't been for a while. But the skill of being able to spot things that, other people may not have their radar on for, and think about solutions to them. And then I think the key thing is to do that in a huge variety of scenarios that, at different clients, basically, right? When you're in the law firm world, that gives you this. And I'm always trying to think of what is it that we bring to the table, right? What is this mindset thing that is different for us, right? You wouldn't think of, in most cases, other professionals as sitting down and being like, okay, well, I've worked with, 200 different clients, and each of them had complex businesses and complex legal, issues to deal with. And now I can take that way of thinking about things and put it in this boardroom, right? That to me is a pretty unique skill set that probably us and maybe like business consultants can bring to the table.
Sure.
Which is super valuable.
I would agree. I joke sometimes if the answer you're hearing from me or our team is no, we're not doing our job. Right? Because our job is to, find the way to yes, and sometimes in very creative ways. No, you're absolutely right.
You're at Hospital Sisters Health System, sort of learning the ropes, I guess you'd say, a pretty significant period of training, and then working your way up. And how did that set you up for your current role? And how did you make that transition?
Yeah. So, I think it was a combination of having some time in the trenches, right? Doing the work. I have perspective now that I wouldn't have had I not spent the time doing that.
Of course.
And I think that also helps with a certain level of technical proficiency and all that when it comes to really knowing how to be a lawyer.
Yep.
I think that was a component of it. I think another component was learning through osmosis, being in the boardroom, seeing how others conducted themselves, good and bad. Having really good mentors that, again, didn't necessarily tell me this is how you do it, but between seeing how they did it, seeing how they were effective, and also working with people that, whether they realized it or not, I think part of what you do when you're on a leadership team is at various points, you start to understand your strengths and weaknesses as well as those of the people around you. And watching how others learn to exacerbate the strengths, not only of themselves, but of their peers, and then also mitigate some of those weaknesses. I think some do it very conscientiously and others just do it because that's what happens when you work as part of a team. I think all of that contributed to me reaching a point where I felt comfortable that, yes, I am ready to be the CLO and take full ownership for what goes on, right or wrong, good or bad, within our team. But then also, in my particular situation, I came in as a team of one. There was no CLO, there was no GC, there was no lawyer at this organization before I got here. So having the confidence to build what didn't exist, develop a service that, really didn't exist, but for people picking up the phone and calling outside counsel, and give it meaning and influence. And no doubt in my mind, I would have not have been able to do that successfully had I not had those years to cut my teeth on some real work, and some stressful moments, being thrown in front of the system CEO to present when, you're still learning kind of how to think on your feet and present on different topics beyond your realm of expertise, if you will. to understanding what goes into a high producing, efficient, effective team, the morale side of things, how you give people the wings they need to fly while also understanding what's going on in your shop and staying aligned. All of those years were absolutely critical for figuring all of that out.
Yes. Well, and it sounds like in your region, let's say, you have a sort of, as you said, ecosystem of organizations that are in the same healthcare space and sort of have this positive sort of, I don't even know what to call it, a positive way of working together, a cooperation in terms of talent and development and mentorship, which is a really fantastic thing. And I have to assume that exists in lots of other places too, right? And tapping into that almost, I think is what I'm trying to get to. Like figuring out how to tap into that is really crucial to success, right?
So one thing that's it's unique to my particular set of circumstances, but I'm sure others, would echo they've had something similar in their career path. It just so happens during the almost 20 years I've been practicing here in Central Illinois for, first as outside counsel, then One Health System, and now Springfield Clinic. During that time, people that have mentored me have now become my peers. People I've helped mentored have become my peers. And as a result, while our various organizations in this ecosystem all, we all work together for the betterment of the patient population, they absolutely have their moments where they're at odds on different fronts. But we've really become a channel for kind of problem solving that in the background. Whether it's, my peer at HSHS, who is a dear friend and used to be my boss, or now my peer over at Memorial Health System, who hired me into private practice and then came to work with me at the clinic, or even in Peoria, went to high school with one of their attorneys at OSF, know the general counsel at Carl Clinic. I mean, we all have a relationship where I would say it's high trust enough that we can kind of shoot straight and cut through the mud and the muck when we need to. And I think that has delivered value to our organizations as well. I think there certainly have been events in the last however many years that could have gone off the tracks, but for having that channel of communication and I don't want to say dispassionate, but kind of level-headed, removed voice of influence.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it speaks to two things. It speaks to the fact that so much of the dispute resolution sort of, solution is to take the passion out of things. I find like there's way too many pieces of litigation that get solved by the next person that comes in and just goes, what the heck is going on here? Just settle. Let's get out of here. Right. Like it speaks to that, but I think more speaks to how do you incentivize external like radar and relationships at businesses and particularly legal teams. We have this very strong sort of heads down culture that comes from law school and extremely high and law firm a bit, but like extremely high like work ethic, incentivization and billing those hours and getting it done and not doing the unbillable work, which gets you in trouble when you're at a law firm, right? Even if, and I've had this happen, even if you're in a room full of clients, your incentive is to go back to your desk and do more billable work, which to me is just nuts, right? But like, how do you incentivize that? How do you get your people? And I've had this happen to me when I was at eBay. How do you get leadership to come to you and say, okay, I'm the new GC here, and we need to have an open channel with our competitors, not to be anti-competitive in any way, but just to be able to have rapport before it's needed, right? to have some trust in the room before something goes pear-shaped. Yeah. So I think, the fact that you were at this Cancero conference, the fact that I see so much more community in the in-house sector, I think that's a really, really positive sign of like building trust and community inside the profession, which we've not had the best avenues for previously.
I agree. I also think, propping each other up in what we do. You'll never hear me talk about one of my peers, whether I know them or not, even, ones maybe I've heard about, but haven't actually spoken with. You'll never hear me talking about them in a disparaging, they move slow, or, they're the team of no, or, they don't drive things over there, because I think it's important that, while everyone's got their different styles, I do think it's important we prop up what we do, because it is important. And I do think I think the work we do is of incredible value to organizations, to their CEOs and C-suites, and the broader team, right? I've been at organizations when we've gone through workforce reductions, reorganizations. I think there's a component we play in those exercises as well, as part of the broader team, that, yeah, you might be involved in some of that decision making and it's not fun, but then how you carry forward the message and keep up morale and maintain buy-in and trust with the organization. I think we have a role to play in all of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm interested, Michelle, and maybe this is for everybody in the whole in-house space, but particularly for the healthcare sector. When you're coming into an organization like Springfield or any big, healthcare organization, as the first lawyer, right? As the first in-house legal leader, what was on your sort of priority list?
I love
to share.
It's a great question, because I actually did. I thought a lot about, okay, what's that first month going to look like? What's that first 90 days going to look like? In my situation, it all got blown up on day 2 when I spent all day in mediation with a payer. That night, it was one that we happened to be in a contract dispute with that later turned into us being out of network for 2 years. It was a big ordeal. But that night, news broke of ghost networks and lack of network adequacy with us not in this network. Long story short, it defined my first few months on the job. So everything I had thought about in terms of how I'm going to learn about the organization, get to know its people, get to know its stakeholders, get to know the board, develop trust with my peers and my CEO, it all went out the window, and I did it trial by fire. And I will say, sometimes just jumping into the trenches, or in this case, being thrown into one, it gets you there pretty fast.
Yes.
And that's what happened in my case. Now, in hindsight, had that not been the set of circumstances I happened to walk into, I do think it's important to get to know your people, your organization, but I do think there's something to be said for doing it fast. And, again, sometimes just getting in and getting your hands dirty quick, it can speed things up.
It's well said. The best laid plans of mice and men, right? Like you can read as many books as you want about how to manage a professional function. And then when on day 2, you get sued by, whichever platform or system or whatever, it all goes out the window. And you do learn. I mean, I think everybody in our profession knows this. Crisis is such a wonderful opportunity to build relationships with the business and to prove the value of the function, right? Nobody says, oh, legal shouldn't be in that meeting when there's a big dispute or a big due diligence process or all the things they don't want to do.
And that was certainly the case here. Now, I will say one thing that, once we had that somewhat in the rearview mirror that really helped me out was I had great relationships with attorneys I had worked with throughout my career. And as a result, a great team came together fast. And
Right.
that made an enormous amount of difference when it really came time to developing a service that didn't exist before.
Sure.
It and that's not always going to work out that way depending on geographical aspirations or limitations. But in this case, I was able to tap into um, friends,
Right
former
on.
colleagues, and without having to pull, no, there was no poaching that went on. It just the team came together organically based on having good, genuine, authentic relationships with other lawyers and paralegals.
Right on. And so did you have some kind of operational support from inside the business, or did you have to build that sort of thing for yourself, from a people, processes, technology kind of, because obviously that's not what private practice lawyers have to worry about.
Right, right. No, that was all built really from scratch. I mean, there was a kind of a contract review function in the finance side of the
Right.
house that I worked with and kind of turned it into what I needed to turn it into. But
Sure.
no, it really was a scratch build, which was fun. It was fun. It just didn't happen the way you would have planned.
Sure.
But for having kind of a jump in the trenches kind of moment.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, I mean, I think this is a fascinating journey. I really appreciate you taking us through it, and I think the great state of Illinois, and particularly Central Illinois, is well served by you being there and the Springfield Clinic being there to take care of them. So yeah, thank you for your time, Michelle.
Thank you for having me, David.
Really appreciate you joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. And
Excellent.
thank you everybody for joining us today on the Legal Leaders Podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks very much.